everyone. We are going to begin this webinar about the Global Biodiversity Score and its application to measure the biodiversity footprint of both companies and financial institutions. So please, if it's not done, do not hesitate to connect yourself to the mentee with the code which is written on the chat and that you should see on your screen. So after this webinar, we are going to have a replay and the slides are going to be sent to the participants. So if you or your colleagues have not been able to attend to this webinar, there will be a replay available. So first, a few instructions about this webinar. So please keep your mics and video off, although you should not be able to reactivate them. So use the mentee for the questions. There is a Q&A in the mentee, and we will try to enter all the questions in the mentee. We will surely not be able to answer all of your questions, so do not hesitate to put likes on the questions that you find the most relevant so that we answer them with a high priority. Do not hesitate also to rename yourself in Zoom so that we can know who you are. And if you want to have all the information before after the event, do not hesitate to subscribe in the Eventbrite events. And there is the link also in the chat. So first, a few words of context about the biodiversity footprints and an introduction about what are we going to talk about during this webinar. So first, we will talk about the Global Biodiversity Score, so an introduction about the state of biodiversity and why should we measure the biodiversity footprint. Then we will talk about the GBS, its applications, and also the B4B+ clubs and the trainings. We'll talk a bit about the way towards a common standard for biodiversity footprinting. And at the end of this presentation, we will have the pleasure to have with us Kevin Mozas from Blooming, who will speak about the pre-feasibility study to assess Geortega's biodiversity footprint that was conducted in 2022. So first, a few words about CDC Biodiversité itself. CDC Biodiversité is a company dedicated to biodiversity. We are a subsidiary of the Caisse des Dépôts Group, so the largest French public financial institution, and we were launched in 2007 to work on biodiversity issues. We are dedicated to positive action for biodiversity and also biodiversity sustainable management with 3 different topics. First, the long-term restoration and ecological management, so really action and field to restore and protect biodiversity. We also work on training and research, so we have a full department dedicated to the research and publication of information about biodiversity and the link with economic. And finally, we have an activity dedicated to studies and engineering with especially the creation of the Global Biodiversity Score, which is our biodiversity footprinting tool. So about the team and the team members, so to date we have around 20 people working for the Global Biodiversity Score within a total team in CDC Biodiversité of around 80 people. There is different kind of activities within the GBS. There is some people dedicated to the development of the tool. And then there is the club B4B+, the B4B+ club, sorry, which is a club dedicated to the co-construction of the tool with corporates, with financial institutions, with technical experts, with consultants. The aim is really to gather all kinds of economic and non-economical actors to work on the tool GBS, but also more generally to work on biodiversity footprinting tools issues. So then we have people working on the biodiversity footprint assessment, which are the application of the biodiversity footprint for corporates. We have João Pereira da Fonseca, who is dedicated to the application of the GBS for local authorities. So that's a new project that was launched in 2021, and the aim is at the end to have dedicated applications of the GBS for local authorities. So we have a team dedicated to the application of the GBS for financial institutions. And finally, we have an offer of training. So for discovering more about biodiversity footprint, about biodiversity and also to be able to conduct your own biodiversity footprint assessment. So at this stage, I'm going to introduce myself because I thought it would be interesting to first introduce you the global context before I introduce myself. So I'm Violette Pradère, and I'm in charge of the application of the Global Biodiversity Score to financial institutions. So if it's okay for you, we are going to switch on the mentee to get to know each other and answer the first few questions. So first, do you come as a representative of the B4B+ club, a non-representative of the B4B+ club, a financial institution or a corporate, a member of a public institution, simply somebody curious about biodiversity? So I see there is a different kind of people here. Thank you. Okay, so for the non-B4B+ club, we are going to talk more about what is this club and what do we do inside this club. And for all the consultants interested in conducting biodiversity footprint assessment and making progress to help your customers to in their biodiversity journey, we have also offer for the consulting firms. Okay, so we have also a question about which company do you represent? So that's a hidden question. If you are interested in having more information or chat with us, please do indicate your company so that we can get in touch later. So also, if that's possible, we would like to know to what economic sector do you belong? So we provided a few economic sectors. So there is also a category for student or job seekers so that everybody can answer. And of course, yeah, education. That's quite a big topic because there is a lot to learn about biodiversity. Okay, so I see there is a lot of different types of activities. Great, thank you. That's very helpful for us. Okay, great. Oh, sorry. So we're going to go back to the presentation. Up. So a few words about biodiversity footprint now, to the context and the overview. So first about the context regarding biodiversity. So we are currently facing a huge biodiversity loss. So on this slide, you can see the situation at the global level in 2010 and in 2050 expressed in MSA. So MSA is the metric used in the GBS. So we will talk more about the MSA later in the presentation, but it means mean species abundance. And the idea is that at 100%, you have a totally undisturbed ecosystem, whereas at 0%, you have a totally disturbed, destroyed ecosystem. And so what you can see on this slide is that in 2010, over the world, there was 32% of ecosystem which were already destroyed, and that's equivalent to the total destruction of North America, Europe, and Oceania. The situation is not going to be better in the next years because, as you can see, in 2050, it's the provisions are that there will be almost 10 supplementary % that will be destroyed in terms of biodiversity integrity, and that's equivalent to the loss of a pristine ecosystem whose size would be the size of China. So now, why do we face this biodiversity erosion? So as you can see on the slide, there is 5 main impact drivers listed by the IPBES, which is a scientific reference body regarding biodiversity, and that are the direct cause of biodiversity erosion. These impact drivers are connected to human activities that you can see on the left hand of the slide. So there is a lot of different human drivers, such as demographic drivers, but also economic and technological drivers. But finally, the idea is that these drivers and these pressures have a final impact regarding the loss and the state of nature. So they have an impact both on ecosystems and on species. So these different pressures are first the land and sea use change, then the resource exploitation, the climate change, which is also a pressure on biodiversity, the pollution, and finally the invasive alien species. Now there is still a lack of satisfactory framework to measure the impact and then be able to make progress regarding biodiversity impact of economic activities. So indeed, for most of the activities that have a big impact on biodiversity, there is not a satisfactory framework to assess their impact. On the slide, you can see that, for instance, agriculture and forestry have a significant impact, so around half of the global impact, but there is not a clear idea of what to do, what to report, how to make progress. There is kind of the same problem for the consumer good business activities. And on the contrary, the transport and the extractive industries do have a developed framework, although in terms of biodiversity, they are not the biggest topic. They are, of course, topic, but not the biggest one. Then I have to say a few words about the international framework, because of course you may have heard that the COP15 finally took place in December 2022 in Montreal, and led to the agreement, which is the Global Biodiversity Framework that was agreed by most of parties present at the COP15. So the Global Biodiversity Framework aims at reversing the trend regarding biodiversity with 4 goals in 2050 and some targets associated to be accomplished by 2030. So here I will not talk about all the goals and all the targets, but I will make the connection with biodiversity footprint and the GBS, which is the topic of today. So the first goal of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement is the goal A, which aims at protecting and restore the integrity of ecosystems and species and genetic diversity. And so the GBS can be one of the tools to assess the state of these ecosystems. Then about the targets, so there is 3 kinds of targets. The first one aims at reducing threats to biodiversity. The second one aim at meeting people's needs, and the third type of targets aim at having tools and solutions that can allow economical actors and non-economical actors to meet the previous targets and the goals. So about the targets that aim at reducing threats to biodiversity, there is specifically 3 targets that can be answered with the GBS. So the first one is about the land and sea use change protection. The second one is about the pollution, and the third one is the target 8, which is about the impact. Yeah, I can see. Oops, sorry. Yep. Which is about the impact of the climate change, because as I said, climate change is one of the main impact drivers regarding biodiversity. About the tools and solutions, the target 15 aims at having large corporates or international companies making disclosure regarding their impact and dependencies on biodiversity, and also have plans to reduce this impact. So the GBS can, of course, be a tool helpful to measure both impacts and dependencies, and then set some actions to reverse the trend. So here you can see the detail about the target 15 and how can the GBS help all kinds of actors to answer this target. So in the GBS, we assess both the impact, assessing the contribution of economical activities to pressures and translating these pressures into final impact. And we also assess the dependencies of economical actors on biodiversity. Then the GBS can allow these actors to set some actions and some targets to improve their biodiversity footprint. So the idea is that the GBS can directly be used by companies and financial institutions to enter this target 15. So now to do the connection between the state of biodiversity at the global level and this global biodiversity framework. So on this slide, you can see the global MSA remaining at the Earth level. So at 100%, you would have totally undisturbed Earth, whereas at 0% you have, well, a totally destroyed one. So as you can see, the planetary boundary stands at 72% of remaining MSA, which means around 72% of remaining ecological integrity of ecosystems. And as you can see, we already crossed this planetary boundary. So at in 2010, we were at around 68% of remaining MSA at the Earth level. And so the SSP2 scenario is not predicting some good news. And so the aims of the global framework and specifically of the goal A is to bend the curve and come back to a more a safer place regarding the state of ecosystems. So now why is this subject important for corporates and for financial institutions and for all the economical world? There is different reason for people to look at the impact and the dependencies on biodiversity. First, there is a management and of some risks that can be associated to this biodiversity erosion. So there is a lot of risk, market risk, reputational risks, etc. We will talk more about the different risks associated to biodiversity erosion in the next slides. But there can also be some opportunities related to this state of biodiversity. Also, there is a growing demand from investors that require more and more information about how do corporates measure the impact and their dependencies on biodiversity, and what is their plan regarding biodiversity. And finally, there is a lot of regulation. There is some regulations already existing, specifically in France, with the Article 29 of the Loi Énergie Climat, but there is a lot of other regulations coming in the next years, and I'm specifically thinking of the CSRD, which is going to be applied in the next years. So there is a big momentum regarding biodiversity with a lot of risks and a lot of opportunities. About the financial sector, we can specifically think about the Finance for Biodiversity pledge signed by over 100 financial institutions, and that aim at having the assessment of impact and dependencies done by 2025. So now a few words about the SBTN and how can the GBS be used for this framework. So as you can see on the slide, there is 5 steps in the science-based target network. So first you have to assess the impact and dependencies, and you have to interpret and prioritize. You have to measure, set and disclose your impact. You have to act with first avoid as much as possible, but also reduce, restore, etc. And finally, you have to track your progress over the years. So the Global Biodiversity Score can help economical actors to do the first, the third, and the fifth steps of the SBTN process. So to assess, to measure, set, and disclose, and then to track over the years the evolution of the biodiversity footprints. So now if you want to come back to the mentee to answer a few questions. Yeah, the question is, how do you define MSA? No, sorry, I haven't. Okay, well, have a bit kind of little problem with the slide. I will come back to the presentation. I will answer them later. Okay, now it's good. Okay, so what biodiversity measurement do you know of? So of course, here we're talking about the GBS, but there is a lot of tool existing that allow corporates and/or financial institutions, but also other kind of actors to measure their biodiversity footprint. So of course, I see a lot of people know the GBS, but also some people knowing the STAR tool, which assesses the impact on at the species level, whereas the GBS is more focused on the ecosystem level. Some people also know EPNL and biodiversity footprint, but some people do not know any kind of tools, so that's great. Welcome. So here we have a mapping that we did on the different tools that exist, and that allows different kind of actors to measure their impact and dependencies on biodiversity. So they are classified by level at what you are in terms of activities. So there is some tools that focus on corporate and portfolio level, and then some tools focused at the supply chain, some tools focused on some products or service, and some tools more precise at the project or site level. Then there is different business applications supported. So first there is the assessment and weighting by and for third parties. There is also biodiversity accounting for external audited disclosure, and finally biodiversity management and performance. So the GBS is at the top left of this table. So we are at the limit between the A and the B, and we focus on the corporate and portfolio. So we can conduct both biodiversity footprint assessment for corporates, but also assessment of portfolio for financial institutions. Then about the caption and the metrics. So there is here some tools that are already operational and some tools under development. Here, I must indicate that this mapping is currently being reactualized. So if you have any suggestions to do, please do not hesitate to get in touch so that we can add some tools. So we already added some tools, but do not hesitate if we forgot some of them. Then about the metrics that are used in this tool. So we are using the MSA, so mean species abundance. So this is a metric focused at the ecosystem level. The PDF, so means potentially disappeared fraction, is also at the ecosystem level. But there is also some metrics at the species level or other kind of species, especially monetary metrics. Okay, so I have only this question if you want to come back to the mentee. So if your company or institution would be interested in conducting a biodiversity footprint assessment, well, in this case, do not hesitate to leave your name and to contact us after the presentation. Okay. So now I will let the floor to my colleague Vincent Guénon, who will introduce the Global Biodiversity Framework more in detail.
Thank you very much. So we are going to see together what the Global Biodiversity Score is, and we'll go step by step. And I saw that there was a question about how the MSA is defined. So that's going to be the first thing we're going to address. First of all, if we go to this, sorry. Okay, so the GBS, as we saw, is based on the MSA metric, which is the mean species abundance, and it will measure the amount of integrity, the level of integrity of a definite ecosystem. So here we have two examples, but of course the MSA can be applied to a lot of ecosystems. So let's take the example of the forest ecosystem. The MSA is expressed as a percentage, and it will range from 0 to 100% MSA. At 100% MSA, we have a totally pristine ecosystem, undisturbed by human activities. And then when we go down the range with more and more human activities and human interference in the ecosystem, so for example, if the pristine forest becomes a forest that is exploited for timber with selective logging, it will decrease its level of MSA. If it's a plantation, it will again decrease its level of MSA until we reach the artificialized level, which is an urban area, or at 0%, it would be like the equivalent of a parking lot. So this percentage of MSA will allow us to define the level of integrity of the ecosystem, and more specifically, it will be based on the disturbance to the species of this ecosystem. So let's take these examples here with the undisturbed ecosystem on the left with 2 deers, 2 frogs, and 3 trees. Its MSA would be 100%. And then if we move on to the next level of this ecosystem, the disturbed one, the ecosystem has seen some disappearances in the original species. So there is 1 less deer, 2 less trees. There is a frog that disappeared, but it was not in the original ecosystem on the left, so it will not count as a loss of MSA. And there are 3 rodents that disappeared, but as they were not in the undisturbed ecosystem at first, they will not count as a loss of MSA. And in the second example of the ecosystem, we have 1 more tree, and again the additional frog that was added and that disappeared, and the rodents are not counted as a loss of MSA, but the trees that disappeared will be counted as a loss of MSA. And so the addition of all these species constitutes, thank you, the final level of MSA of the whole ecosystem. And then, now that we know the level of MSA of this ecosystem, of course, we have to integrate it to the surface of this ecosystem to understand precisely what amount of biodiversity is lost. So we will integrate it to the surface expressed in square kilometers to get the final metric, which will be the MSA square kilometers. So an impact of 1 MSA square kilometers would be equivalent to the total destruction of 1 kilometer of undisturbed natural ecosystem. So in this example on the right, let's take a pristine forest that covers a surface of 100 square kilometers. So its MSA would be at 100%. Then we arrive and we turn this whole forest into a plantation with an MSA of 30%. There was a biodiversity loss of 70% MSA over a surface of 100 square kilometers. So the impact would be 70 MSA square kilometers. Sorry, I have a trouble with that. Okay, now we're going to go back to mentee, and you can answer this question. According to you, what aspects of biodiversity are measured by the MSA? So that's what we just saw. Let's see if it was clear. Is it the risk of extinction of species, the species richness of a given ecosystem, the species abundance of a given ecosystem, or the ecosystem services provided by a given ecosystem? Okay, so we have a lot of good answers. Okay, thank you. Okay, so in this case, the correct answers would be the species abundance as well as the species richness, because it will count the total, the number of species and also the abundance of each species in this ecosystem, and it would be a combination of all this. So now that we know a bit more about the metric, which is MSA square kilometers, how do we use it and how do we get it to measure the impacts of the economic activities? So how does the Global Biodiversity Score works exactly? So let's work from right to left here. We want to get the impacts of a company's economic activities, and we want to know its impacts on biodiversity state. And we will work with a pressure impact model, which is called GloBio, which has been developed by the Netherlands Environmental Agency. It will allow us to translate pressures into impacts. To do that, we can input data from the company into the GBS. We can input a lot of different data. We can input the best, of course, would be exhaustive ecological surveys, but that would be non-practical and non-feasible because it's extremely difficult and extremely costly. So we will work with several types of data that can be combined together. So if we move on to the right, then it would be pressure data. If we know the land use changes that were caused by the company's activity, it will allow us to translate the pressure into impacts. We could also, as well, use inventories. So, for example, purchases or GHG emissions of the companies that were measured. And we could also, as well, use the turnover, the purchases, so financial information of the company. And all of this information will be combined together to give us a precise idea of the impacts of the company. If we take an example, maybe to make it a bit clearer, we use this example of companies that sells poultry meat. So this company sells poultry meat. It would be best, of course, to carry out exhaustive ecological surveys on the field that belong to the company, but that would be, of course, too difficult. So we could as well use the data a bit on the left, which would be the corn fields that were used to produce the corn fed to the chicken. That would be best. And we could also use the amount of corn that was purchased by the company to feed its chicken, and it would combine with the data of the land use of the surface of cornfields. And if we move on again to the left, it would be a bit less detailed, but we could also use the proxy of the amount of poultry meat that was sold by the company Chicken Corp, and that all of this data would combine together, and the financial information, which would be the amount of poultry meat sold, would cover sort of the blind spots of all the other data that was entered. So it's always a safe space, safe plan to gather some information. Sorry. So now that we've entered all this data, how does it work? So as we saw, there's a model that's called the Global Biodiversity model, which would turn all of these pressures into impacts. So the pressures are derived, come from the IPBES pressures on biodiversity. There are 5 pressures: land and sea use change, direct exploitation of resources, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species. So the last one is not covered by the GBS. It's often because the data is very difficult to gather. And the first 4 pressures are divided into 11 sub-pressures. And these sub-pressures are divided into 3 realms, which we call realms, is terrestrial ecosystem, freshwater ecosystems, and marine ecosystems. So the marine realm is not covered by the GBS because, again, it's difficult to gather data on this. But we are beginning to work on it. For example, we have a TNFD pilot, which works on overfishing. So it would be the direct exploitation of resources. So these pressures, now that we know which pressures are covered, a key concept of the GBS to keep in mind would be the separation between static impacts and dynamic impacts. Static impacts are stocks and dynamic impacts are a variation of these stocks. And it will differentiate between accumulated negative impacts and new impacts that are created during the year of assessment, for example. Why do we do that? Because as Violette said earlier, we have already overshot beyond the planetary boundary on biodiversity. So if we only look at new impacts, we would not be able to also reduce our past impacts to come back over the safe space of 70% MSA globally. So let's take the example of this company to understand really the difference between static and dynamic. So this is a plant next to a river. So in the middle, you see the building. So the building occupies space, which is a land use pressure. And it is a static pressure because the building is here and it is here to stay. So it occupies always the same surface. This building also emits phosphorus, which is released into the river. It's always the same amount of phosphorus. So it's always the same amount of pressure exerted on the ecosystem. So it is also a static impact. It also consumes water, and it consumes always the same amount of water. So it is a constant pressure, pressure on the river. So it is also a static impact. But there are also dynamic impacts in the form of, on the right, a new building, which will occupy new space, new land. And it's a dynamic impact because it will appear during the year of assessment. And then the GHG emissions of the plant will be counted as dynamic impacts because they will increase the pressure of climate change on biodiversity. Even if they are always at the same level of emissions, it is a dynamic impact because the pressure increases with each ton of GHG. Now we are at the next year. So we see that the building on the right is finished. So it is not a dynamic impact anymore. It occupies the same amount of land. So it will be consolidated into an accumulated negative impact. The other thing that has changed is the phosphorus emission with new emissions of +5 tons per year. So here we will differentiate between the static impact or the historic, the constant emission of phosphorus, and the dynamic impact, which will be the new impacts that were added, the new emissions that occurred during this year. So this is a really key concept for the GBS. And also a last concept, but I'm sure most of you will be very familiar with this, is that we use the separation between scopes, which is compatible with the Natural Capital Protocol and the GHG Protocol, which will divide the impacts between Scope 1, the direct activities of the company, Scope 2, the impacts due to energy purchases, and Scope 3 divided between upstream, so all of the supply chain of the company, and downstream, which would be the use and the end of life of the products and services of the company. Okay, now we can go to mentee to answer this short question. Does your company use the notion of scopes from the GHG protocols? Yes, no, but you already know of it, or no. Okay, so we see that most of you use or have heard about the notions of Scope 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So now that we've calculated the impacts of the company, how could it be useful? Well, for example, a lot of companies are already setting targets which have an impact on biodiversity, and the GBS allows to measure the actual biodiversity impacts of this target. So, for example, if we take let's say Danone, which has a target of a 25% reduction of the total volume of water consumption. So reducing the total volume of water consumed would reduce the biodiversity impact of the company. But the GBS would allow to measure precisely the perimeter, the extent of this biodiversity impact reduction. So these are all examples of targets that could be measured thanks to the Global Biodiversity Score. Other examples. Okay, so now we've seen extensively that the GBS can measure the impacts of economic activities onto biodiversity, but it can also estimate the dependency of the company's activities to biodiversity through its dependency on ecosystem services. So there are 21 ecosystem services which are provided by the biodiversity and that enable or facilitate human activities. And these ecosystem services allow the company to function, and it is important for the company to know how much, to what extent does it depend to ecosystem services and to which ones. So to do that, we have a sectoral approach. We divide the activities of the company into sectors, also of its supply chain, and into processes that all of these processes have a specific dependency to ecosystem services. And all of this is aggregated to give us the final dependency score of the company. If we take an example here, we have a heat map that represents the dependency on ecosystem services of several economic sectors. So, for example, we see in the first line that the agriculture and agri-foods sector is very highly dependent on groundwater, surface water, and water quality, because of course it uses a lot of water to function. So if these ecosystem services were to decline, it would have an impact on all of the companies into this sector. And this is a methodology, as you see on the right, which was used by European central banks in the Netherlands and in France. And we've put the links to the papers so that you can consult them. Thank you very much. And now I will let Elisa present the B4B Plus Club.
Thank you very much, Vincent. I think we'll make a quick look at the questions and answer on which we received already a lot of questions. And just a quick note, as we will be probably running out of time before the end of the webinar, we won't be able to answer all the questions. So please indicate to which questions you want us to answer in a priority on the Q&A directly, and we will answer the question with the more likes. So we have a first question on the focus of the GBS. So do you focus on particular species and like indicator species or apex predators? So I think Vincent, this one was for you.
Oops, sorry. So the MSA does not focus on any particular species, and it does not give any more importance to any species compared to another.
Okay, then we have a second question on what is Globio, which received also a lot of likes. So Globio is a model which assesses the impact of various pressures on biodiversity, and which was developed by the PBL, which is Netherlands, the Environmental Assessment Agency of Netherlands. And this is a model on which we're basing our pressures impact relationships to calculate the impact of various pressures on biodiversity. And you have a lot of information on Global website, but also on our publications in which we describe our methodology and how do we use the Global model in our GBS methodology. Then we have a question on the baseline state of ecosystem and how it is defined when working on already modified ecosystem, which is actually a question that we already received. I don't know if Amandine, you want to take this question?
Yes, so here we're the baseline state is the 100% MSA, so a non-disturbed ecosystem, so meaning an ecosystem that has not any pressure. And so on the definition, it is really theoretical. The global model is not really focusing on this reality, but more use the pressure impact relationships between the pressure, the quantity of pressure and the quantity of impact.
Okay, then we have a question on how was the 70% planet boundary assessed. And I think it's also linked to another question on what is exactly the planet boundaries and what do we mean by this. So basically what we call the planet boundaries is a safe operating space in which So global environmental changes in which the risks are considered as manageable for human development. So in which human development can still handle the environmental risks. And this was actually also defined by a paper from the PBL, so which develops the Global Biodiversity model, and which we can put the reference in the chat, which is called Towards a Safe Operating Space for the Netherlands, and in which all the methodologies we define this figure is explained. Do we still have time to take more questions now? Or okay, so we have another question on how do we calculate the GBS for a bank, not their lending or investment, but their own operations or purchased energy. So Violette, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, thank you, Elisa. Then we will go back to the presentation, and we will take more questions at the end of this webinar. So I think your answer is actually in the question. How to conduct a biodiversity footprint assessment is quite similar to how to conduct carbon footprints. So it's actually with data collection and your activities on scope 1 and 2, and then having either CDC Biodiversité or trained consultants measuring your impact on scope 1 and 2 based on the data you provide. In terms of data, the data can be more complex than for carbon footprints, but we can do with the data that is available at your level. And maybe, yeah, it's the same thing than carbon footprint. I mean, the impact of lending and investment is much larger than the direct impact for banking companies. So we really advise banks to also assess the impact of lending and of direct investment. So I will go back to the presentation. Again, do not hesitate to put likes on the questions so that we are assured to answer them. And I will let the floor to Elisa.
Thank you very much, Violette. So I did not introduce myself when we started the question. So very quickly, so I'm working as a research officer for the B4B Plus Club, which is the club of businesses and financial institutions for positive biodiversity, which we already discussed quite quickly during the introduction, but on which we will focus a bit more. So first, first introducing the context on the GBS ecosystem and how do we see this ecosystem. So first, it's important to remind that CDC Biodiversité developed and is constantly developing the Global Biodiversity Score and is implementing constant evolutions and updates. And is also developing a GBS for a local authority, which is a similar solution, but adapted to this type of actors. And then CDC Biodiversité also trains some actors. So here you can see on the figures all the stakeholders that are involved in our training. So we will actually train some assessor consultants, but also data providers and rating agencies that will then work with financial institutions. But we also train directly companies and financial institutions that can work on their biodiversity footprint internally. And we also train academics that are interested in our tool and in its applications. And CDC Biodiversité also, of course, sells some biodiversity footprint assessments and some ratings directly to the companies and financial institutions. And here you can see that after being trained, then assessors, consultants, and rating agency can themselves sell some biodiversity footprint assessments to companies and ratings to financial institutions. And lastly, CDC Biodiversité also developed a solution to sales assurance and actually get some checking and verify the biodiversity footprint assessment that are conducting, which is called the GBS Verified, and which is actually launched in 2023 this year. It was developed last year and is being launched right now. So this is to have an overview on the GBS ecosystem, then to focus a bit more on the B4B Plus Club, how it functions and who are our members. So here you have an overview of our current members, with which are a bit more than 50 right now, and which are organized in 3 different working groups. So here you can see that we have our value chain working group, but also a finance working group, some consultants working groups, and we are also working with some partners. And each working group actually focuses on the challenges specific to the stakeholders. And we have some members, for example, in the value chain working group that are interesting in, of course, the biodiversity footprinting topics, but also trying to take some case studies using the GBS or using some solution for a financial institution that we propose. And some of them are also conducting some biodiversity footprint assessments internally, such as Decathlon, or also launching some biodiversity footprint with consultants or with us, such as Schneider Electric. Then to focus a bit more on the content and on the objectives, concrete objectives of the B4B Plus Club. So our first really important objective for our members is, of course, to help the members understand all the topics around biodiversity footprinting and the challenges and how it can serve actually a company's decision, but also financial institutions' decision and how it can solve external reporting. It's also a good way to anticipate all the developments that are ongoing related to biodiversity footprinting, such as financial, regulatory, and market developments in terms of taking some action to reduce its impact on biodiversity. So we help the members to first get an overview of what's happening in terms of financial, regulatory, and market developments and what can be done to enter this. And the B4B Plus Club also, of course, tried to adapt the GBS that was developed initially in the context of the B4B Plus Club to the constraints and needs of the companies through the conduction of case studies that allow the members to test the tool and then share feedback with other members. And more generally, we always keep our members informed on the biodiversity footprinting world and what's happening. And we regularly have some experts during our working groups and meetings, and regular bibliographic monitoring to share with the members all the latest reports and regulation that went out. And we also have an offer of technical support for the GBS use. So here it's kind of what I just said, but a bit more into detail. So we have here the detailed content of the B4B Plus Club, which is separated into 3 big categories. So this is the first one is a stakeholder ecosystem, which actually is composed of the meeting that we are having annually with the members, which includes both the working groups, specific working groups on the topics I just described, so finance, value chain, consultants, and also a new working group that we're launching in 2023 around more specific and sectoral topics such as energy, utilities, textiles, but also biodiversity credits. And it's also the occasion for members to access to a network of companies and experts on these topics and to share best practices and feedback. Then we have this literature review on biodiversity footprint assessment, which also includes actually a presentation on the GBS updates and new developments during technical support webinars, and which I will detail just after. And also some capacity building activities, because first members have a priority access to the training courses that are proposed by CDC Biodiversité, which we will also present later in this webinar. And also the access to the technical support via webinars and via individual support by telephone, and also the possibility to conduct a case study. And in this B4B Plus Club, also we have a license that is included for the GBS use. Here you have the B4B Plus Club fee schedule, on which we will not focus today, but just for your information. And please note that this fee schedule for a consultancy is specific and is not represented yet here. So if you are a consultancy, please just contact us to have the right and adapted fee schedule. Then to go on the GBS licenses. So you have actually various situations depending on which you need a license or not. So first, if you are a consultant and then you are selling some biodiversity footprint assessment using the GBS, then you need to be a B4B+ Club member, which includes the license, as I just said, and you need also to get trained to be a level 2 assessor. And then if you're a corporate or financial institution getting a biodiversity footprint assessment, it actually depends whether you are conducting the assessment with an internal assessor. If so, but if you don't want to publish the result, then you just need a license. But if you want to publish the license, then you need the license, but also to be level 2 assessors to follow CDC Biodiversité trainings. And if the BFA is conducted by an external assessor, then if you are not publishing the result, no license is needed. But if you want to publish the license, even if it's an external assessor, you will need to get the GBS license. And for your information, the license fee for investors and companies outside of the club is at 1,050 euros. And then, as I was mentioning, there is a technical support including in the B4B+ Club. So here it's quite important because actually the GBS is constantly evolving and updated. So technical problems of course can occur. And to address these problems, you can access to a technical support via webinars, but also individually by phone. And CDC Biodiversité also ensure that the problems that make it impossible to calculate impacts are resolved in a reasonable timing, so which is a week. And then to make the technical support function, so you have a ticket system on which you can publish your questions and get some answer from our team. And you can also participate to our webinars, which are often actually like 5 or 6 times a year. So after this presentation, we are quite interested in knowing if some of you are interested in joining the B4B+ Club. So as for the first question, you can indicate in the mentee if you are interested. And I think after we can move forward. So I will now let the floor to Amandine, who will present concretely biodiversity footprint assessments.
Yes, thank you, Elisa. Hi, everyone. So my name is Amandine Kemmel. I'm a research officer and doing biodiversity footprint assessment for companies. So directly applying our methodology to compute biodiversity footprint. So a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS follows 4 steps, which are on this slide. So the first step is the framing step, where we define the perimeter of the assessment, but also we identify the biodiversity issues at the sectoral level for the company, for example. Then we have a specific data collection for the company. It is really a key step because it will define all the results of our biodiversity footprint. And at this step, we are collecting all the company data necessary to compute biodiversity impacts. And it is one of the most time-consuming parts because the company should consolidate all the data internally and then provide to the GBS assessor all the data. Then with those data, we input it in the GBS, and then we make a quantitative analysis and a quantitative and also a qualitative analysis on which we can define what are the most source of impacts for of a company on biodiversity and where to take action, for example. And with those results, we can, for example, set targets and objectives to at the most reduce the biodiversity impacts for the future. And so those trajectories can be set for to respond to SBTN, for example, so science-based targets for nature, etc. So then about the data that we are using, so Vincent already presented some elements, but here are all the data that we can input in the GBS. So it goes from very generic data like financial data until pressure data, so like land use or so concentration of emitted phosphorus or nitrogen emissions, for example. And you can see that most of the data are already collected for carbon footprinting. So if you have already performed a carbon footprint inside your company, you can easily retake those data to compute a biodiversity footprint assessment. There are some data that are specific to biodiversity footprint, like land use or ecotoxicity emission, on which the work can be a bit harder for the consolidation. And then I was talking about the SBTN, so the Science-Based Network for Nature. And CDC Biodiversité is a partner of the corporate engagement program from the SBTN, and we are trying to align our BFA methodology with those SBTN recommendations. So Violette has already presented you the global framework, but the GBS is really aligned with the three first steps. So the first step is the assessment. So CDC Biodiversité with the GBS proposed some sector-level materiality assessment using the SBTN tool and the Encore database. And with the biodiversity footprint results, we can also provide a value chain hotspot assessment by identifying the most impactful industries from the company value chain. And if known, we can also identify the most impactful suppliers if we have the information. And then we can also give a company level refinement, which is analyzing and present biodiversity impacts per scope. So scope 1, direct impacts from scope 1 and the value chain impacts, so scope 2 and scope 3. So we present the impacts per scope and pressure, so terrestrial or aquatic. Then we have the second step of the SBTN. So this is still under development by the SBTN. They are drafting some elements. So we tried to interpret and propose a first methodology to answer this step. But the idea is to interpret and prioritize the results from the step 1 and the biodiversity footprint. And this step is achieved using the level of influence a company has to reduce an impact. So in the GBS, we have integrated the possibility to link with each data a level of influence a company have. And so after analyzing this, we can better understand where action can be activated easily, with which is it short-term or mid-term effects on biodiversity. And then with the first step, so it is also under development by the SBTN, but CDC is also giving some elements to define the company baseline on which company will define and set science-based targets. And there were a question on the chat on the GRI, and so we are also working on this to respond to the GRI, so the reporting guidance. Then about the results disclosure, so we are disclosing all the results in MSA square kilometers, like Vincent presented you before. And we are trying to give some comparisons and order of magnitude into area equivalents. So for example, 46 million MSA square kilometers is a loss of an ecosystem equivalent to the area of Europe, North America, and Oceania combined. So it can help the reader to better understand the extent of the impacts. Then CDC Biodiversité is also working on benchmark fact sheets. So the aim is really to give an overview of what are the impacts of each sector. So at the end, it also gives an intensity of impact by sector. So an intensity of impact in MSA square kilometers per 1,000 euros. And it helps the company to compare a specific company to compare its results to this benchmark. So you can see on the slide that we have already published or some fact sheets are under consultation on 4 sectors. So the agriculture and agri-food, the construction sector, the chemical industry, and the energy sector. And we are currently working on the raw material extraction fact sheet. And so it will help all companies to compare themselves to a sector. So we have prioritized some industries because they are the most impactful for biodiversity. So it is the case of agriculture and agri-food or mining and extractive. So these are some sectors where the GBS is more mature, and there are some other sectors which are more hardly assessed by the GBS, like chemicals and cosmetic, the distribution, the building sector, the waste and management. So for the moment, these are the limitation, but we are working on this year by year to improve the coverage of our tool. Then if you are, so this was about more technical elements of a biodiversity footprint assessment, but in terms and condition to do a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS, we will, here are some elements of duration and budget for each biodiversity footprint assessment that we can have. So it really varies according to different criteria that are listed on the slide. So it will vary with the perimeter. If you have a very wide company with a lot of sites, it will take more time than a company that has only one side. It will be the price and the duration will also depend of the new development that we have to do. So if you are working on a sector already very well covered by the GBS, like agriculture, it will be simpler for us than a new sector, etc. So for really easy not easy, but really basic biodiversity footprint assessment, like a screening, which is only using financial data, the price vary between 28 and 56,000 euros, and for very complex cases, it can be up to 100,000 euros. And the duration of a BFA is usually around 6 months. So assessing a biodiversity footprint is quite a new topic, but it is growing year by year because nowadays we have more than 40 assessments realized or are undergoing today. And so we have a lot of companies that has already realized a biodiversity footprint assessment of that are in very different sectors, so agriculture and agri-food, but also electricity or the distribution sector. And so the first company that have realized those biodiversity footprint were Schneider Electric and Decathlon. And Schneider Electric is doing its second biodiversity footprint assessment with us this year. And those biodiversity footprint assessment can be done by us, but also by GBS trained assessors. And here is a list of consultants with who you can work to compute your biodiversity footprint. So we will give you the list of all participants, and all the elements are on our website also. Thank you. So we will answer some questions. I don't know. There are plenty of questions on the mentee, so don't forget to like them if you want them to be responded. So first, how will the GBS help the disclosure to GRI, biodiversity, SBTN, TCFN? So Violette.
Okay, so first about the TCFN, I will guess it you probably meant the TNFD, but sorry if that was not the case. About the TNFD, my colleague Vincent will speak in the next part about the application for financial institutions, and will specifically talk about the TNFD, so I will not spoil his part. About the SBTN, so we talked a bit already about the SBTN, but we're really involved in the Science-Based Target Network. So we're a partner of the Corporate Engagement Program. The aims is really to have a tool that can allow corporates to fulfill their engagement related to the SBTN, and so the GBS can be a tool useful for the first, the third, and the fifth steps of the SBTN. So the GBS allows corporates to assess their impacts and dependencies, and then to track the progress over the years. About the GRI, that's quite a big question, but I will try to keep it short. So there is many indicators listed by the GRI, and the MSA is listed as an indicator related to the condition of the ecosystems.
Then there is a question on how do we enter data in Globio. So this is not really on Globio that we are entering data. Globio is the model that we are using with the GBS to estimate the biodiversity footprint. So, but the data that we are entering in the GBS were presented before. So we are using financial data, consumption of goods like and raw materials like crops quantities, but also some pressures like GHG emissions, ecotoxic substances emissions, and land use. Then what are the limitations of the GBS today? So the limitation of the GBS is mainly based on the coverage. So we are not covering all the biodiversity. We do not have an impact factor for all consumption of goods, for example, but also the GBS covers on 4 out of the 5 pressure by the IPBES. So basically it does not cover marine ecosystem, and we are not also covering the invasive species pressure on biodiversity. What if the starting point is disturbed? and then a new sensitive species is introduced in the subsequent survey, is the new species then not counted since it wasn't in the baseline? I think it it was linked to a previous question that we have seen about the pristine ecosystem. So if we have an already disturbed ecosystem, it means that the MSA is not at 100%. And if we introduce a new species, the question is this species endemic to the ecosystem? If yes, it can be accounted as an improvement of the quality of the ecosystem. And if not, it is not considered as a new species and is not accounted as an improvement of the MSA according to the definition.
Okay, so now we are going to talk about the application of the GBS for financial institutions. So as we've seen previously, the GBS can be used to measure the biodiversity footprint of companies with the biodiversity footprint assessment, but it can also be used by financial institutions to measure the financial institutions to measure, the biodiversity footprint of their portfolios. So it can be applied to listed assets with the help of the database BIA-GBS, which was developed in partnership with Carbon for Finance, who's a French data provider who's originally specialized on climate, and with the help of their expertise and their databases and our methodology, we created this platform. But database. But we'll come back to it later into a bit more details. And for non-listed assets, it would be the GBSFI, which would be a specialized consulting service, but which we will also be going into a bit more detail later on these two classes of assets. Regarding the regulations, so there are already a number of regulations applying for companies and financial institutions regarding their biodiversity reportings. We'll focus here on the right part of the slide for the regulatory context of financial institutions. So there are regulations at the European and French level. First, at the European level, there is the European taxonomy, which allows to rank economic activities into sustainable and non-sustainable sectors according to 6 categories, including one category on biodiversity, for which the criteria have not been published yet. And the European taxonomies will ask of financial institutions to publish the share of their investments into sustainable sectors. The second regulation would be the SFDR, which would put an obligation on financial institution of transparency on their financial products. More specifically, they would be compelled to publish the share of investments they have in companies who are located in or near biodiversity sensitive areas, or who are working on these areas. In France, there is the Article 29 of the Energy and Climate Law, which was released very recently, and it goes a bit further, quite further actually, than the European regulations, as it requires a reporting in double materiality. We'll go a bit about that into more detail later, and it requires to report both the physical and transition risk of the company, and also the alignment of the portfolios with biodiversity targets. So a bit into a bit more detail about the assets that are covered. So as we said, the listed assets are covered by the BIA-GBS. So it could be listed shares and bonds, and also sovereign bonds. It's a turnkey solution So it's quite easy to implement. So it's just giving you access to the BIA GBS database. And for non-listed assets, there's a difference between, on the one hand, private equity, infrastructure, and real estate, on which CDC Biodiversité has already worked. So there's a methodology existing that can be adapted to your needs. And for the other assets, it's not covered yet, but we are very open to working on any type of other assets. So please contact us if you have specific needs that you need to address, and we'll try to make a tailor-made solution for you. Regarding BIA GBS on listed assets. So as we said, it was created in partnership by CDC Biodiversité and Carbon for Finance, and it allows to measure the impacts and dependencies of portfolios on biodiversity. It covers listed shares and bonds, as well as sovereign bonds, and it can be used to report on biodiversity for financial institutions. So there are an example of first users here. And the example of on the right is the MAIF, which used the BIA GBS to report on their own portfolios biodiversity footprint, and they saw that the territorial static impact of their portfolios was equivalent to the size of the Yvelines. So it was equivalent to the destruction of pristine ecosystems, the size of this department, and their dynamic impact, so their new impacts added each year, was equivalent to half the size of Paris. And that's information that they published, so it can be very useful for your reporting. A bit more detail about the double materiality approach, which is required by the Energy and Climate Law, and it's also proposed as a concept, as a supporting concept by the TNFD. So the double materiality means assessing both impacts of the financial institution on biodiversity, but also its dependencies on ecosystem services. And it gives information on the risks, and it allows to manage risks. So both transition risks, which are socio-economic or regulatory evolutions that would impact the portfolio. The proxy metric for this transition risk would be in the impact in MSA square kilometers, and the physical risk is estimated as with the dependency score of the company or the activity to ecosystem services, expressed in percentage. And so all of this is available for listed assets on BIA GBS. And one last word about the LEAP process, because the TNFD proposed an approach which is called LEAP, and that covers the whole economic activity and the whole value chain of a company. It is separated into 4 parts. So the locate part, which is situating geographically the activities of the company or of the financial institutions and its interactions with key biodiversity spots. The second part is evaluate. So that's where the economic activities, impacts, and dependencies on ecosystem services, will be evaluated. And then the assess would be identifying the risks and opportunities of biodiversity, of the activities on biodiversity, and prepare, which would be more focused on reportings and strategy. So BIA GBS can feed the LEAP process for a financial institution. It allows, for example, to skip the locate part, because all of the activities of the companies, for example, in a portfolio are already estimated. And the evaluate part would be fully covered by the BIA GBS. And then part of the assess and prepare parts would be covered, or it is under development. But the BIA GBS could be useful there too. So if there are representatives of financial institutions here, would you be interested in what we've talked about, should it be on listed assets or non-listed assets? Do you think it could be interesting for you to use the Global Biodiversity Score? Yes, no, or you do not represent the financial institutions, in which case you are excused from this question. Thank you very much. And now I will let Elisa present you the trainings for the GBS.
Yes, thank you very much, Vincent. So after all this information, just a few more. So as we have already mentioned earlier in the webinar, CDC Biodiversité also proposes some trainings around biodiversity printing and around the GBS. So first, to give you an overview of the 4 trainings we offer to different stakeholders. So there is a first training, which is really focusing on the very fundamentals of biodiversity footprint, which aims to understand the biodiversity loss challenges and the key concepts around biodiversity footprinting assessments. And also developed very recently a training specifically dedicated to financial institutions that want to know more on the regulatory framework and the related risk and the tools that exist for the financial sector, specifically in terms of biodiversity footprinting. So this is a very new trainings. And then we have our trainings on the GBS specifically. So we have a training which is composed of 2 levels. So trainings level 1 is an introduction to the Global Biodiversity Score tool and to the BFAs. And then the level 2 digs further into the GBS and aims to master the tool and concretely conduct biodiversity footprint assessments. You have a link on the slide to access our training platform on which you can have the information and register, which we will put in the chat just after. But to give you a bit more information on the content and on the format, we can move to the next slide. So here you have some details on the trainings dedicated to the GBS tool. So as I just said, level 1 is really an introduction to the tool and is a training of 1 day. There is a fee of 1,600 euros and is composed of a maximum 15 trainees. And you have some next session in February in English and then in June in English, but there is also a session in French in April, to which you can participate if you're a French speaker. And then regarding the level 2, so here the objective is really to master the GBS and be able to conduct biodiversity footprint assessment by yourself. So this is how you become an assessor. This is the trainings you have to follow to have your assessor status. So to access level 2, you have to complete level 1 first, and it's a training of 2 days, so it's a bit longer. And it's training with a fee of 3,050 euros per trainee. And then you have some session in February in English and also June. So it's just after the level 1 trainings. And once again, you have a session in April in French for a French speaker. Then to give you a bit more information on the fundamentals of biodiversity footprint training, which was launched in 2022. So here the objective is really to understand the very key concept of biodiversity footprinting. So first, understand the causes and the pressure around biodiversity loss, to get familiar with all the international frameworks of the regulation and so on. And also to present the main concept that you will need to follow the trainings a bit more detailed. So for example, level 1 and level 2 around the metric that we can use, the accounting frameworks, existing tools, and so on. So it's basically open to everyone who are willing to know more around these topics. And there is a first part that is online and autonomous course, and then you have a live class of 1 hour and a half with a facilitator and a trainer on our site. And you have next session in March and in June. So the dates are all in the presentation and also indicated in the Rise Up platform. And here's the price of 500 euros per person. And just to precise that this one is English spoken only, so there's no training in French. And you just have to get just a little bit of knowledge related to biodiversity and ecosystem services to follow the training and understand what's going on. And finally, to focus on our training dedicated to financial institutions. Okay, so first a question on mentee. So here you can indicate once again if you are interested in a training around biodiversity footprinting, so that we can be aware and maybe contact you if you want more information and register to our next trainings. And specifically, here is a question is for level 1 and level 2. So to know more around the GBS and to master the GBS and become a GBS assessor. Okay, so finally, to conclude on the trainings with the very last training CDC Biodiversité developed and launched at the end of 2022, which is around biodiversity footprint and reporting for financial institutions. So here the objective is really to get familiar with the biodiversity footprint framework and regulations and for the financial sector specifically. Here's the contents is, well, getting familiar with the key players, the key initiatives that exist, and also the key regulation that are already in place or being developed for financial institutions. Also learn more about the double materiality approach that we just heard about during this webinar, and yeah, discover all the tools that already exist and that can be of interest to conduct a biodiversity footprint assessment. So it's available for anyone willing to understand the stakeholders, regulations, and initiatives. It's a format of 2 half-days, so it's a bit longer than the one I just presented, and it's an online class with biodiversity and GBS experts. And next session is in April 2023, and there is also another session in June. And the price is of 1,600 per person. You have to first validate the fundamentals of biodiversity footprint training. So it's a package training. You have to first conduct the fundamentals and then get access to this training for financial institutions. And once again, it's for English spoken person. So sorry, I was muted, but you can once again answer in the mentee whether you are interested in the training biodiversity footprint and reporting for financial institutions, which is our very new training. I'm out of battery, but. So now after the trainings, we will finish these presentations with a few words on the initiatives, convergence initiative and reporting initiative that exist and on which CDC Biodiversité as GBS are involved and aligned. So very first, in terms of a reporting initiative, CDC Biodiversité is involved and closely following a lot of initiatives and work. So very firstly, and as we just talked about it in the financial sections, we are closely following and involved in the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure work, which defines a reporting framework for financial institutions. So for the in terms of the CDC Biodiversité involvement in the TNFB, so we are a member of the TNFD Forum first, and we also conduct some pilots within the B4B+ Club. So with some members, we are trying to apply the TNFD approach with our solutions, and we are also a part of the Knowledge Hub. Then we also, of course, closely follow the European initiatives and regulations, such as the Green Taxonomy, the SFRD and CSRD, which we also mentioned earlier. And we participate in the consultation for the development of these regulations. in this, and we also, for example, participate into the consultation, notably of the EFRAG standards, which are developed to follow and encourage the CSRD application. And on the French side, we also conduct some Article 29s with our financial tools for financial institutions. Sorry, and then we also are involved on various initiatives that are working on methodology. So, for example, within the European Commission ecosystem, there is the EU BNB platform, the Business and Biodiversity, on which we are taking part. And we are also part of the Align working group, on which we will focus just after this slide. And we are also involved in the science-based target network work, especially through the corporate engagement program, on which we are part once again. So we are trying to follow everything, and we are contributing to this work. So to quickly focus on the Align project, which is the Aligning Accounting Approaches for Nature, which is a project for businesses and financial institutions that was launched in 2021 to try to convert from a technical point of view on all the biodiversity footprint topics, and in terms of accounting biodiversity footprintings, and to allow to have like coherent and common vocabulary and tools for different users. So just to note that the Align recommendations for a standard on corporate biodiversity measurement and valuation were released in December. If you want to have a look, it's also interesting, and a work on which CDC Biodiversité was involved and participated. And then we can quickly go through the Biological Diversity Protocol, the BD protocol, which is a common conceptual framework for the accounting of biodiversity, for which first report was released in March 2021. And just to quickly explain that a proof of concept had been conducted with the GBS to apply the BD protocol with our tool. And as we can see in the figure here, we can have we distinguish accumulated negative impacts and positive impacts, which quite fits with the GBS accounting system, as Vincent presented at the very beginning of the webinar, if you remember. And just to note something that is not appearing here, the BD protocol also suggests to take dynamic impacts into account, which also fits quite well with GBS-based assessments. And so now we are done with our presentation, but we will let the floor to Kevin Mozas to present a case study. And we thank him very much for his participation and for his very active participation in the B4B+ Club and in our activities. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Kevin. We can hear you
Hello.
well. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Do you have the slides with you? Or shall I share that?
Yeah. If you please, if you want to share them.
Okay. Okay. Can you see that? Can you see correctly?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. So I am Kevin Mozas. I am the co-founder of Blooming. Blooming is a consulting company. I'm going to introduce it briefly. And thank you to CDC Biodiversité for the invitation, so that we can talk about the work we have done for GRT gas regarding the footprint, the biodiversity footprint assessment of their activities. And this is in particular a pre-study for them to consider the opportunity to proceed to this this work. Then a few words about Blooming. So Blooming, as I said, we are a consulting and project company working specifically on biodiversity related issues. We are here to allow businesses to take up the biodiversity challenge. This is, we work for any kind of company, basically regarding whatever is sector of activity, size, or level of maturity, let's say, on this topic. We truly believe that we have to demonstrate to companies that they have an interest in acting for biodiversity preservation. And as biodiversity knows no border, we work, of course, in France, but everywhere else we speak Spanish, Portuguese, English, and French, of course. We propose different doors to be open, let's say, for companies to address this topic. This can be from training and awareness workshop, for example, through biodiversity strategies, as we can do with the GBS, biodiversity on site with, let's say, on-ground projects, and also through labels and certification. In other words, what we do is our aim is to instilling the topic within companies through webinars, workshop, etc. To structure this topic, because it was missing up to not so far a long time ago. We had a lot of carbon and climate strategy, but not so much biodiversity strategy. And we propose tools and methodologies to do that through indicators, audits, biodiversity footprint evaluation. So you may hear BFA for this later, so biodiversity footprint evaluation, non-financial reporting, and engagement program. And at the end of the chain, let's say, we also work on, as I said, on reduction of impacts on industrial sites, for example, or renaturation and investment in natural capital. But let's go to the topic, which is the work we have done for GRT Gaz. So GRT Gaz is a French company. So for whom don't know what they do, GRT Gaz is a transporter of the natural gas across France. And so this is a very large pipeline transporting gas, natural gas, and to allow then the distributors to do the job, so to distribute the natural gas to companies and households. So this is a very large infrastructure company with nearly 33,000 kilometers of pipelines buried, and nearly 10,000 installations on the ground. And one thing to mention is that 90% of their infrastructure is on natural or semi-natural environments. So GRT Gaz knows they have impact, of course, on biodiversity, and they are committed to know more about that in their CSR policy. And they have done this job to assess on qualitative aspect, let's say, how they impact the biodiversity through the 5 pressures, you know, from the IPBES. So they are, GRT Gaz is a member of B4B+ club, and they were wondering before starting GBS work if the tool is adapted. And they have these 2 questions. Is the tool adapted to their activities, which is an infralinear operator, and what is the kind of data they would need and what kind of effort they would have to deploy to get this data. So this is basically the 2 questions they made us, and we try to answer through our study. As a summary of the context and objectives, we can say that GRT Gaz, first, this is important, is really committed to fully integrating the issue of biodiversity into its strategy. They have the intention to measure the footprint of its activities on biodiversity. And then they needed to evaluate to what extent the GBS is adapted and to qualify, let's say, to assess the framework and the effort they would need. So this is what we've done for them. We work with this following methodology in 3 steps. So first step is really through interviews to set the frame of the work. So for us, it's very important with interviews with key people within the business units of GRTgaz and with review of documentation to really understand how the company works, the organization, what they do, to define the scope and the perimeter of the work. Then through that, we are able to identify the main sources of impacts on biodiversity coming from their activities and across the whole value chain, of course, and start establishing what data is available in the company already, and to be able to analyze it. Then we came to the second step, which is the assessment and let's say the analysis of the data. So we have classified it. I come to that just later. The goal was to evaluate the level of exploitability of the data available in GRTgaz in the GBS. So by data, we mean, as you have seen before in the presentation of CDC Biodiversité, we mean inventory data, purchasing and financial data, pressure data. And as we like measuring, we wanted to quantify also this exploitability by rates and what kind of process we need on the data and what level of accuracy we can expect from the GBS on this. Third step, recommendation on if we have to model, if we have to complete some data and on the collection. I come to that just after. So as a result, so the first thing we have established, let's say the full an exhaustive list of the data available, which gives a large table, Excel file with nearly 200 lines. And we have not translated this one, sorry, but you can see on the left side the main sources of impact, or an extract, of course. So here we have, for example, the fuel and the chemical products. And for each data, we have defined if it can be used in the GBS, in what conditions can we use it as such directly, or do we need to model it, to process the data before by change of unit, for example. And we went until to which file in the GBS we need to use and which is the impact factors within the GBS file. We also have been to the EcoInvent database review, but it is maybe too much detail for now. This is a LCA database that can be linked with the GBS. So the 3 slides for the results on first the exploitability of the data available in GRTgaz for the GBS. You can see on the right the details of the results, and on the left the summary. And the conclusion on that, it's very good in the fact that we have 75% of the data available already in GRTgaz that can be used in the GBS. And those 3/4 of data, they cover the most significant issues and material impact of GRTgaz. To give you an example of what is not exploitable today, we have, for example, data of the consumption of cooling liquid. Well, this is a chemical product, and there is no such factor in the GBS today. Also, the non-climate impact change due to bio-NGV, because there is no impact factor. However, we have climate change impacts due to bio-NGV thanks to the carbon footprint assessment that we have had. This is a very good document to have the carbon footprint assessment, because you can use the results in the GBS, but also the input. So very good results in terms of exploitability. We wanted also, because GRT wanted to know the effort they would have to provide or to use the GBS. And so we can see here that 56% of the data can be used directly in the GBS. So we can take the data, the number, it is the X number liter cubic meter of water, for example, you can put it directly in the GBS. 20% needs to be processed. What does that mean? It means more or less most of the time. I mean, it's a unit you need to change. That's it. And there is still 14% of data. No, sorry, 9% of data you need to go through a further modelization. But this 9% can cover significant impacts or issues. As example, on the right, we mentioned the land use, of course, because GRTgaz has buried pipeline, but they have easement strips to be able to access this pipeline anytime. So this is under control. So part of this easement strips are under the control and then are included in the impact. And then the work is to define what is the MSA level, so the mean species abundance level of this area. So it's usable data, but we need to model it. Another aspect is, for example, the pesticide consumption, which is, well, the pesticide is used by service providers, and you need to access this data. And meanwhile, we can model this quantity of pesticide in order to introduce it in the GPS. Third result, the accuracy of the results of the data. So as you've seen previously, you have different kind of data. So from the less accurate financial to pressures, and in the middle inventories. So quantities of material of product. So here in case of the GRTgaz, we have nearly 60% of the data is introduced in pressure GBS file, which is very good. And thanks to again, the carbon footprint assessment that has been done previously. And only 7% are financial data. Still, this can be improved because for the metallic, for example, metallic material, which is, we believe, a material impact, it will be worth to find out how much tons of metal instead of how much money they have expended to purchase it. So after that recommendation, so the recommendation as a pre-conclusion, let's say, as an outcome of our study. So just few examples, but we have made recommendation on the data collection. As I said, the metallic material, get it in tons instead of euros. The chemical products, we have only the number of bottles. It would be much better to have the quantity in liter or cubic meter. Well, also a recommendation on the data additional characteristic. They should define on data, for example, the CIS number for the chemical products, because we directly find in the GPS which products it is about then, or for the waste recycling, because in the GPS you can apply these impact factors, and then you define impact on the downstream of your activity. And then finally on modeling, so we have proposed how to define the MSA level of the land. And for instance, to conclude, then in one slide, finally, the study has demonstrated that there is a high degree of exploitability of the data they already have to be used in the GBS, that the GBS is capable to take into account the specificities of GRTgaz activities, that the accuracy is good, but can be further improved on working on the data collection. This work has also allowed us and GRTgaz to identify the data that has to be completed, detailed, or modeled, and was a great opportunity to disseminate this topic of the BFA to the company, because we have to speak with different business units, and in particular to the data holders, because this is a key issue to get the data. And at the end, we have concluded with them that this is really relevant for them to pursue with the assessment of the biodiversity footprint assessment then other activity using the GBS. And this will be then the next step. And that's all for me. So thank you very much. And any question, if there is any time, I'm available. Or you can contact me through this email.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you a lot. I think we have very few time for questions. Well, maybe one question, but I don't think there has been any question about your presentation, so that must have been very clear. And then there is a few questions left, and maybe one question is about what is the latest update on the GBS and what its next big plans. And so it's a very hard question to be answered in 1 minute. So why did I choose it? Anyway, what I can mention for the biggest next step for the GBS is that in the next version of the GBS, we are going to use satellite data to have better granularity concerning the land use classes. So that will allow the assessment to have more granularity concerning the land use pressure. Well, I'm sorry about the other question because we won't have time to answer them. Kevin, thank you again. Thank you all for attending this webinar, and there will be a replay and the slides will be sent. So have a nice evening or afternoon, and see you soon.